Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the December meeting of the Scrutiny for Communities Committee. My name is Gwilym Wren, Chair of the committee, and welcome to all the members in the room, anybody online, and to members of the public. Two members of the committee have joined. There's Councillor Tom Power and Councillor Surya Aluya. Thanks to Dawn Denton and Andy Dingwall for their contributions. I think Councillors Power and Aluya are they online? No, right.
Oh, that's a good start.
They will no doubt join us shortly. Firstly, before we go too far, can I check that everybody can hear? Can you hear me in the room? Say aye. Can you hear me online?
Yes.
Good.
Good.
Thank you, Rosemary. Right, the agenda pack with papers is available via mod.gov or directly from the council website, and the link that was sent out to members. Please, when I invite someone to speak, could they clearly state who you are for the benefit of anyone who's listening to the meeting online, so they can identify you later on if they need to follow up anything. And I also warmly welcome members of the public and media. That's probably going through. There's one of the problems of talking off the cuff and then going through a script. You end up sort of tripping over yourself. So welcome to the media, because I didn't mention you before. The meeting is, of course, being recorded as per usual, and it will be available at some point after the meeting online on the website. Finally, as agendas are now viewed electronically, could I kindly request that members and officers refer to page numbers from the published pack to assist all present in finding the appropriate information. Okay, well, we'll start the meeting proper. Any apologies for absence, please, Jenny?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, committee. We have no apologies for absence recorded, unless anyone wants to let me know now.
Andy Kendall.
Thank you.
Okay. Right, and we better mark down Councillors Aluya and Power as well, I think. As it's their first meeting. Good. Minutes of the previous meeting is item 2. Now, the last meeting was held on the 30th of October. The minutes have been prepared and circulated. Are there any comments on them, or are you happy for me to sign them as an accurate record? May I have someone to propose that they be adopted, please? Thank you. And okay. Any declarations of interest, please? Item 3 in relation to the business being conducted today. Okay, no additional declarations of interest. Thank you. Right, we have item 4 is public question time, and Mr. Hall has requested to speak in a personal capacity regarding a question raised in October. Mr. Hall, would you like to come forward and ask your question? Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Nick Hall. I'm a Pilton Parish Councillor, and for the avoidance of any doubt, I am making this speech in a personal capacity, and I will keep this brief, Chair. On the 24th of October, ahead of the last Scrutiny Committee, and in line with your committee's deadline, I submitted a statement with a number of questions on the Glastonbury Festival debrief. I did not receive answers ahead of the meeting. Mr. Coles gave a brief verbal reply at the meeting, but I was promised a written response. To date, I have not received that response, and time is running out to make changes ahead of the 2025 festival. I have been informed that Sarah Dowden is now responsible for answering my questions, and the purpose of me speaking today is to establish when I will receive a full written response, and perhaps it could be provided before Christmas. So that's all I have to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think in passing, I would say I also wrote a letter on behalf of the committee after that meeting, and I've yet to receive a response, and I suspect that the reasons are the same. Chris, is Sarah on? Sarah's online, isn't she? Sarah, are you happy to respond to that?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah, Mr. Hall, what I'll do is get a response to you before Christmas, a written response back to you before Christmas. I haven't got the answers prepared here today, but I will do so. I've just got to try and get some of the information for some of the questions off our system. So what I'll do is make sure you've had a response by close of play on the 23rd of December.
Sorry, Sarah, you seem to be having some mic issues.
Oh,
Could
sorry.
you repeat that?
Yeah, so I was just saying to Mr. Hall that I'll get a response to him by the close of play on the 23rd of December.
Okay, I think that just to repeat for the absence of doubt that Sarah will give you a full written response before the close of play on the 23rd. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah. Sorry, move on to item 5, which is our forward plan. For January next year, we have a budget update penciled in, the customer service annual report and environmental health. And we've also got an HRA performance financial and property report. On a Wednesday, and we need to be done and dusted by 12:30. So I'm not really, if we have 4 items on the agenda, I think that more or less fills us up. So we then move on to the March meeting, and I think going forward into the new transformed council after April, there'll need to be discussions about how some of these matters are dealt with or scrutinised in future, and the frequency of meetings. But that's for another day. But on the 12th of March, we have a report on open spaces and CCTV. But if you look over the page, you'll see that we have also got various other items which need to be factored in, including the quarterly updates on devolution progression. We're having one of those today. Updates on the progression of income generation proposals to avoid the cessation of the CCTV service, although I suspect that will be probably picked up in the March meeting. Yeovil is a much bigger devolution than the rest, so we will have to fit in a specific report. Though I think didn't Chris isn't we have a request to fit something in about Yeovil?
Jono sat behind me, but there was a devolution presentation today. Jono, is that part of? Is Yeovil on that? Yeah, so there's a slide on there today, but we can obviously bring back more detail if that's required.
I think there was a bit of discussion of prior to the meeting about whether a fuller briefing on the progress on the Octagon and the business plan, the renewed business plan, should come here. And I think my view was it probably would be better for an all councillor briefing rather than coming to a scrutiny meeting. So I think that will come early in the new year. And then there's devolution service agreements, a joint meeting with Climate and Place about the Glastonbury Festival. We are planning a visit to the CCTV offices in Bridgewater. That's early in the new year. I don't think we've got a date yet, though, have we?
No.
And we were going to invite Councillor Sully, who's chair of the Harbour Management Advisory Committee, to attend, although he has responded to me saying proposing an alternative person who might know a little bit more about harbours. So I need to consider that. Are there any items that committee members think, oh, right. Councillor Pearce, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's just at the last meeting, and it is minuted, I asked if Towns Fund projects could be added to a future agenda, please. And I notice it's not in the list. It's just I'm concerned about, with the loss of so many staff, about delivery of projects, and some of them are worth millions of pounds, and I'm really anxious that we don't lose those opportunities.
Okay, that's Towns Fund's delivery, so we will add that to the list. Chris?
I think we just need to be conscious that they currently sit constitutionally under the Climate and Place Scrutiny Committee.
Okay, well, can we please let the committee clerk for Climate and Place know that we've had a query about this and find out when they're going to be looking at it, if and when they're going to be looking at it? Is that possible?
Was it project deliveries?
Well, it was the project delivery of the town deals. Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Chris. Wes?
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to Yeovil devolution, would it not be useful to have someone like Liz Dawson here, who's been liaising obviously with our clerk, more so we see Liz quite a lot on Zoom, for example, giving us updates. Would it not be useful to have her online or present in the room?
Yes, I would think that's possible, isn't it? That's Liz Dawson.
I just want to make sure we're clear. So today's agenda item is a general approach and the live devolution projects. It's not specific to one area or another, but we'll touch on all of them. The request a moment ago was something around the octagon rather than specifically about devolution, which we're going to pick up in a different way. If there's another request to pick up a very specific item on Yeovil devolution, then we can do that. That isn't what we've prepared for today. We've prepared for the current live devolution packages as a whole.
Okay, so to be clear, I mean, on the list, we have Yeovil because it's quite a big one. As a distinct one, we'll get a general overview today. The Octagon Theatre, which is also quite a big one, and dependent on the new business plan, will, I think, be delivered now through an all-councillor briefing. So if we want to look at the rest of the stuff around Yeovil, we can do that. We can ask Liz Dawson to come along. Okay, is that fair enough? Yes.
I wondered, could for an update on where we're at with right of ways, please? I know there's a lot of changes going on in right of ways, and it's parish has been asked to consider taking on some right of ways, and I'd appreciate if we could have a full briefing on what the intentions, plans are for right of ways.
There's a risk I'm going to sound like a broken record here because that's constitutionally sits with highways under Climate and Place.
I thought it came under here.
No, it's part of highways.
So can we
really?
again make a request that they consider that, please? Right, sorry, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to follow on from my colleagues' questions. You mentioned the Yeovil Town Plan, you've mentioned the Octagon, but you didn't say anything about Westlands. Now, I wonder whether that's going to be included in that all-member briefing, or whether that's subject to something completely separate.
No, if you look on page 18, the final the bullet point, quarterly updates on the delivery of the devolution of specific assets to Yeovil Town Council, Yeovil Recreation Centre, Octagon Theatre, which is now being separated out, and the Westlands Entertainment Venue. So we'll ask for a fuller thing on Yeovil.
A focus on Yeovil.
Yeah, is that all right?
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Power, welcome.
Apologise, I got caught up in traffic. I do apologise, and I sent my lateness to I think Jamie Jackson, but I thought he might have been the. Oh, Oh, I do apologise.
I was.
Okay. All right. Well, good. Well, welcome to the meeting. Okay. If there are no other items for the forward plan, we will move swiftly on to item 6, which is the month 6 budget forecast, and we'll invite Christian Evans and Kerry Heppel. I think it's just Chris today, isn't it? Yeah. To lead us through the myriad delights of the budget.
Thank you.
6 months.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Chris Evans, Head of Finance Business Partnering. So I'll just try and multitask to try and share my screen, although it'll only come up small on there, I understand. Second. Hopefully it's... Oh, it's come up large. There you go. There's a bonus. Okay, so the recommendations in the paper. So if there are any general comments or observations that you would like to consider making to the executive in the report, and if there are any actions set out in the report are appropriate, and if there are any further actions the scrutiny would wish to include in the report. So just a quick overview corporately. So on the £639.6 million budget corporately, we are forecasting an 8.419 million underspend, which on the face of it does sound like good news. However, sorry to be the voice of doom. 6 million of that is actually a contingency, which clearly we do not need to use or want to use if we have to. But also just a reminder that to balance the budget this year, we did have to use £39.5 million in reserves, and also the capitalisation directive of £36.884 million. So really that underspend will just reduce the amount we need to use through reserves. So sorry to just say about that. But anyway, that was an important point just to make. So on the community services perspective, so the net budget, £34.4 million. There is an underspend predicted, which is good news, 1.572 million, which is about 4.6% of the budget. So that is a positive movement from month 5, which is really good, of 1.125 million. Generally, you see there housing, there is a small overspend of 22,000. I say small because it's a large budget of over 6 million. Also a point to note is that the number of families in bed and breakfast accommodation for over 6 weeks is continuing to decline to only 1 family at the end of September, which is, just wanted to point that as good news. Customer services, mainly salaries based budget, so that's on budget, which is good news. Cultural services, the £1.3 million underspend forecast at the moment. It's well documented around the leisure contract, which we don't currently need the money for, which is good. Regulations and ops is a £280,000 underspend. That's mainly surrounding environmental health and their salary savings and them holding vacancies. So overall, a good picture from a revenue perspective. I've put in a final slide there on the medium-term financial plan savings. So community services overall are required to save £2.866 million. 115,000 is achieved at present. 2.4 million is on track, and there are some at risk of 225,000 and 114,000 unachievable at the moment. So I just need to clear this. So the two savings for at risk and unachievable. So there's a 19,000 relates to beach car parking. There's 2 savings totaling 100,000 relates to ground maintenance and street cleansing pressures. There's 1 saving at risk relating to the income generation, which is quite ambitious within Lifeline. And then finally, the unachievable is 114,000. We are still looking into this, but it looks like it's a duplication, and the income is already received in customer services. So we'll continue to work on the medium-term financial plan. I will get some more narrative to provide in the next meeting. So there's a whistle-stop tour of community services. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. I think Chris Hall, the director, wishes to speak first. Chris?
Yeah, just to clarify, when it comes to the report on housing now sits from a management perspective. So those are the general fund services mixed in with the HRA. So the general fund aspects now sit for line management purposes with adults, but are still part of your remit under the Constitution. So that's why you're seeing it. The overspend that's reported around housing options, it's worth bearing in mind that we have a government grant provided to us, which is placed in an earmark reserve. So although it shows as an overspend, we also have government grants who offset that. So there is a debate going on at the moment as to whether we call down the grant first of all, or we do it at the end of the year. But just so you're aware, there is a reserve with the ability to balance out that current overspend. So provided for a purpose, being used for a purpose by government. And then I just wanted to touch on one of the unachievable savings in Lifeline. So the fees and charges were set last year. There seems to have been an issue when the fees and charges were set that there was a duplication built into that. So it's not that the service aren't delivering what they said they could do, but somewhere in the process there's been a duplication. The answer to that is that for this year's fees and charges, subject to them being approved by council, we will increase the fee and charge and therefore increase the income, but we'll leave the budget static so that it will close out that pressure. So we'll continue to gain additional income, but we won't expect that as part of the budget setting process, and therefore it will become equal next year and we won't see that pressure.
Sorry, so can I just clarify that last point? So what you're saying is that somebody's put a double entry in, basically saying that we're going to get the money twice. And you're saying that since the charges are going up, we're actually going to over exceed our income. So therefore that pressure will ease, because one of the things we've had from the Chief Financial Officer, the Section 151 officer, is that every directorate is going to have to, you know, go through everything with a fine tooth comb and report rigorously on what the savings are. I think from a budgetary point, or simply a monetary point of view, then what you're saying is fine. I think the thing that slightly bothers me is that we end up with a double entry in the expected budget to begin with, which is unfortunate. And we had one of these problems last year. If you remember, there was anticipated income from the Yeovil area, which hadn't been received since 2021, and yet it was still in the budget. So we do need to be much tighter on this kind of thing, because we need the picture to be as accurate as we can, as quickly as we can, just to keep everybody sane, I suppose. And anyway, thank you. Was that an accurate reflection of where we are?
Yeah, I don't think it was quite a double entry, but there was something to do with the way that the fees and charges were set, where it was, by the end, there was an overestimate put into the budget. I don't think it was quite double, but there was a differential between what the service believed was achievable and then what ended up there. And that's the mechanism you've described is exactly how we will reverse that next year.
Very much. Right. Sorry, over to the committee. Who was waving at me? Dawn.
So Chris, I think at the last meeting we said that rough sleeping would be going elsewhere, but from what you're saying, I'm understanding rough sleeping will stay within this scrutiny committee. If that's the case, I do want to request that that is put on the list of things to look at, because I understand there are large pressures on our rough sleeping numbers at the moment. So if we could please add that to the future programme, I'd appreciate it. And can you just clarify for me, where does that show within housing at the moment?
So rough sleeping, I believe, is under the housing options line in the budget. So that's the overspend of heading towards 400,000. So I will temper that by saying we were given money by government to support this activity. We've chosen to put it in an earmark reserve and draw it down at a point in time. So we are spending government money, delivering the service that government expected. We are just accounting for it in a slightly different way because it's in an earmark reserve. But by all means, yes, it is part of the constitution. Therefore, it's part of this committee's remit. So we can ask for the relevant service director to come forward and talk through rough sleeping and the pressures in housing options.
Be good if that could be done. Yeah, Marcus.
Thank you, Chair. I could have lots of questions. Here's a newbie to the committee. I was looking at the B&B, where there's a little graph on bed and breakfast accommodation, and that's obviously that's plus 6 weeks, obviously going down, and obviously that's probably quite expensive. I'm looking at the graph on page 21, though, of temporary accommodation. What I don't see in there is last year's figures. So where it's gone up to 300 from 250 at the start of the year, and it seems to settle back down again, is how that compares to the year before. And are we seeing a trend up? Because I assume that 6 weeks in bed and breakfast doesn't include those who are then moved into, I don't know, other temporary accommodation, whether that be our own stock or whether that be, holiday lets, etc., etc. And I just wondered, is there an increase? Are we seeing an increase in that? And what's the cost implication on that in the long term if that is forever going up? And that's why I don't quite know. And I just, I don't know how many temporary accommodation units we actually own ourselves, and are they all being used, and are they all full, and etc., etc. I mean, the reason I think my other reason, I suppose, is as a division councillor, I probably quite rarely don't get as much division work, as much casework as other people seem to. But one thing I do get is at times I feel like a housing officer when I'm dealing with things, and I've dealt with clients. We use the word clients, constituents. I don't want to use customers, constituents, residents who've actually been waiting for an awful long time to be moved from one band to another, or be, I think is it from relief to main duty, I think is the word. I've been picking up all sorts of lingo on that. And actually, are those decisions being made quick enough? Because obviously, if someone's on silver, or they're in temporary accommodation in silver, actually, if they suddenly get put on gold, that means actually they've got more chance of maybe getting a permanent house, which then of course saves us money. So I wonder how quickly those decisions are being made. And the other concern I've got, if we look at the structure and there's people in, I think it's Home Finder. I mean, we look at the Home Finder and what's going on with the restructure there. I mean, one of the officers I've probably spoken to the most in the last 3 years is probably not going to be in place come next year, and depending on the consultation, etc. Hopefully that changes. With the restructure, is that going to get worse and better? And how are we going to stop these people? I mean, one of the people I was speaking to was waiting for a decision way over the amount of time she should have been. And actually, once that decision got made, suddenly she was out of temporary accommodation, and suddenly now she's got a house, and it's out, and that obviously is saving us money. But in the meantime, if things aren't happening as quickly and smoothly as they should be, then we're getting people who maybe aren't as, that's very hard to say, but would maybe be silver, getting those houses above people who are being gold just because would have been gold just because they haven't been processed quick enough. And that is, I know we look at the overspend in housing, but surely the knock-on effect with that is that we'd be saving money in the long run, whether it be next year or 5 years' time.
Okay, well, there seems to be quite a lot in there.
Yes, I ended up into more of
a general talk about housing rather than the budget. Chris,
I think it was specifically as the graphs were in front of us.
Yeah, well, quite. As I think some of the questions I think you raised probably deserve greater scrutiny and rather than as part of a finance thing. But I'll ask Chris to respond at the moment and see where we can take it from there. I hope you've got a list of the questions because I lost track. Can you also sit a bit closer to your mic? Because yeah. Okay, thanks, Chris.
Thank you. So yes, this does sit under this committee, as I've explained already, but is now managed through the organisational structure chart, which is now adults services. However, I can answer some of those questions. So the chart itself is based around a finance report. So it only shows this year because it's this year's finance report. It's not a performance report. We can get historical data if people want to assess it, but it wouldn't be in this report. So in terms of banding, we don't band people to save money. We band people because they meet an obligation, and therefore it's not about the speed at which people move from silver to gold. It's about whether they have a legitimate change in circumstance that causes them to be rebanded. So if people are dissatisfied with their banding, they can go through an appeals process and they can be rebanded, but it needs to be based upon a change in their circumstances, not a frustration as to how long they've been on the list. So the Home Finder list currently has just over 11,000 people registered for social or council housing accommodation. We don't have the availability of that accommodation, and therefore there is a real challenge in that process. In terms of temporary accommodation, haven't got the number of units to hand, but they'll be full, which is why we're having to use bed and breakfast or hotel accommodation for those who meet the statutory duty. So where we have a duty, we are housed for up to 56 days whilst we undertake the process to determine whether they are legitimately able to go onto the Home Finder register. So speeding things up isn't necessarily the answer here, because actually what you might find is during that 56 days they don't meet the duty and actually they will be removed from that temporary accommodation. So we need to be clear that this isn't about speed, it's about at the end point there's a lack of accommodation to move people into, and at the upfront point there is an opportunity to intervene, protect people in tenancies that they're currently in if possible, and do a range of preventative work. And we have tenancy sustainment officers within the HRA, and I know a number of the social landlords registered providers also have tenancy sustainment to try and help people maintain the tenancy they have rather than lose it and therefore become homeless. So I know there were lots of questions in there. I think it's a bit of a whistle-stop answer, but again, if this committee wishes to have something specific around temporary accommodation, perhaps we incorporate it into the rough sleeping and housing options discussion.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Marcus, would that do for you?
That would do. That's it. I say my questions were maybe a little bit more detailed than, but I understand it was a bit on ad hoc where I asked, so thank you.
Thank
I
you.
do have another one actually on environmental health, but I'll let somebody else go first.
Oh, I mean, the questions you're asking, Phil, if you want to jot them down and send them to me, and we'll work out the best way to deal with them. Is that all right?
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Simon Coles, please.
Thank you, Chair. Chris, it's just something you said that I wasn't quite sure I understood properly. You said that when people are in temporary or bed and breakfast accommodation, we have a time scale of 56 days to assess their eligibility for accommodation or eligibility to go on the housing list. If we find that they are not eligible, what happens to them?
So I probably need to get one of the officers involved to give a more specific answer, but my understanding is we have up to 56 days to establish and to treat them within that statutory responsibility. So we home them for up to 56 days whilst the process catches up. So it enables them to go through the home finder application and we establish their true banding. But if we need a specific answer to what happens in the meantime, if they're found not to be met with duty, I'd have to go away and get an answer from an officer.
Could that answer be shared with other members of the committee, Chair?
Yeah, yes, of course. We can circulate that when it's received. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from members of the committee? Nobody online? Oh, Simon, you're online as well, I see. Can't get enough of the committee, can you? Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Christian, and thank you, Chris. Oh, sorry, Suzanne, I beg your pardon. Yes.
Sorry, you said you were going to come to me afterwards. Previously, when you were mentioning the bed and breakfast, you mentioned hotels. Where does that figure in this graph, or does it not?
It's in housing options. So regardless of where that temporary accommodation is, that's where it's funded from, housing options.
Okay, but it doesn't figure on this graph at all. Is that correct?
I need to double check, but I would imagine it's incorporated into it because whether it's a bed and breakfast or a hotel, it's temporary accommodation, but I would need to check.
Trying to bottom out. Okay, you think it's there somewhere, basically.
It's just another
Thank
name
you.
for it.
Yeah.
Well,
Hotel,
yeah,
bed and breakfast.
well, I assumed that until Chris mentioned them separately, and I thought maybe it was another thing that we weren't seeing here before us. But you think not?
I think it's included in that figure, but I will get an answer.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We're all done. Thank you very much. Thanks for everybody for reporting, and we'll move on to number 7, which is the HRA Q2 budget monitoring report. And Kerry, welcome.
Good morning, Chair.
Yeah, when you're ready.
Thank you. Just going to share my screen. Is that sharing?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is the forecast outturn position for the HRA as at the end of September, which is Q2 position. To let you know that the HRA is forecasting an overspend of 1.717 million. This is an improved position. This is reduced by 0.642 million from Q1, which was reported at 2.359. So it has improved by just over 600k. Just to let you know that the main areas of pressure are as a result of voids in both an under recovery of income, that's from like rents, for example, and also an overspend in voids where we have to spend money to bring those properties back to a livable standard. So in terms of mitigating the overspend, the HRA management team have been putting in place actions, and we are seeing the level of voids are reducing, and this is having a positive impact on our rent projections. This is how the position from Q1 to Q2 is improving. With regards to the capital programme, just a reminder that the total approved budget is 92.896 million. The forecast spend at Q2 is 55.446 million. And the forecast slippage at Q2 is 37.723 million. But just to let you know that we were expecting to spend 32 million or 32.7 million of that in future years, because that related to social housing development schemes. So, for example, like North Taunton, for example, which is a project that spans a number of different financial years. So as at Q2, we are reporting an extra 1.438 million on a social housing development scheme that's kind of pushed forward into future years, and also 3.579 million on fire safety works. Just to let you know, with regards to the fire safety works budget, why it slipped. So this is primarily in relation to the fire door upgrades in communal areas that was due to be undertaken in 24-25. We had to go through a full procurement tender exercise, which was initially delayed because they had to undertake a specification process for those five fire door types and to ensure the council was obtaining value for money. We had to get a specialist fire safety consultant in to undertake that review, and their recommendation was then subsequently incorporated into the tender process. The procurement has now been undertaken and we're going through the required governance process. And to let you know that we should be, we have sourced 3 appropriately accredited fire door installation contractors to enable an accelerated programme to commence in Q4 of this financial year and to continue at pace in 25-26. Just to let you know that from a reserves position, so bearing in mind I was forecasting the 1.717 million overspend, just to let you know that this could be funded from general reserves, and that would enable general reserves to still be maintained quite high at 12.465 million. So this is above our recommended minimum balance. And a quick update on earmark reserves. We have very minimal earmark reserves from a HRA point of view, and we are projecting to spend all of those within this financial year. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Succinct. Hazel, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question about fire doors. It's not really related to the costs of them, and I know why we're doing them, but sometimes when they're fitted, the tenants or homeowners, if they're in flats, blocks, we do the lot, can't actually open the doors very well. They're too heavy, particularly for sort of frailer women. And I just wondered when, as part of the contract, that the contractors are actually checking that the people who live in the flat are able actually to open the door properly, because it's much more sensible for them to adjust it before they leave, rather than, you know, a team having to go back and sort it out when they've eventually got round to moaning about it because they can't open the door properly. I mean, I know it, you know, it's happened 3 times in my patch. So it must be fairly common, and they were all fairly slight women or women with disabilities. And I just wondered whether somebody could pass that back through, that the contractors do need to check that the person for whom the door is provided can actually use it. I mean, I do know, no, it's actually 4, because I do know one lady had to move because she couldn't operate the door. So it is quite an issue, you know, the accessibility for those for whom you're providing the safety. Thank you.
Yeah, when the decision came through, I did go back and ask various questions. Mainly it has to be said about the cost of these things. But I think you have raised this before in this committee, haven't you? I think you might have done. Well, I certainly do recall you mentioning it before. Anyway, I mean, I without going into detail, I'm assuming the doors have closers on them, so they should be some sort of assistance. But Chris is waving at me, so no doubt he has a little bit more information. But it is a problem if they've got to be heavy enough to do the job they're expected to do.
Absolutely, these are the front doors into their flat, not the ones into the block, the communal doors.
No, but it's the proper doors off the communal, off the hallways and things like that. Yeah, that's right. Which have to be to the proper standard so that they can be rescued if need be.
It's an issue. It's an issue if we've got people who can't physically push the door open.
Yeah, absolutely.
To get into their property.
You can't get out. It is a point. Yeah. Chris.
Yes, I think there was a limited problem initially, and we're now doing the surveys in a different fashion, and we're fitting power assistance, so the doors will be openable by the press of a button.
I mean, will that be universal or just on demand?
I'd need to check with the service. My understanding is it's on a case-by-case basis, so it's dependent on the occupant and their changing circumstances. But there'll come a point where we will obviously have a cohort of those flats as they turn over where we know we've got power assistance and some where we haven't, and that will form part of selection. Equally, they can be retrofitted with power assistance as required.
Okay, so that would be part of the void work. Any other questions? Councillor Cravers, please, then Dawn Johnson.
Yeah, fire doors save lives and buildings.
Oh, yeah.
Well, in fact, they don't even need to do a fire door, just close your doors. That's sorry to have to, I mean, obviously this is a monitoring report. But you did mention the word voids, and I've been flicking through trying to see what sort of amount and number of voids. And I suppose as our own HRA account and I have to do homes in Sedgemoor as well. But do we have a figure, I suppose, is a way of finding out at any one time through all the housing providers, whether it be housing associations, ourselves and homes in Sedgemoor, how many voids we have at any one time and how long they're void for?
I'm presuming we cater for an average number of voids across the year, but also I was going to ask this because I wanted to know because the average time I seem to remember on the Taunton Dean, or the target time for turning a void round was 21 days. So I'd like to know what that is now as well.
So I can answer the general question, but we don't receive information from registered providers or other social landlords in regards to their voids performance. They would do that through their own board mechanisms. What we will, of course, see is those properties that are placed onto Home Finder. So you can see effectively, if you think about Home Finder, that's where nearly all of the available social or registered provider landlords will place their properties. That's the process that's used for Somerset. So you can see the turnover within there. That will also include new stock. So acquisitions or new build would all find their way into that process usually. But RPs are not under any obligation to report to the council their void performance. If we want specific void performance figures, we can go away and get them from the service. They're not included in here to my knowledge. They are taking longer and they are costing more, which is one of the issues. That's why there is additional cost and pressure within the voids part of the service, and that has a knock-on cost and pressure for tenancy incomes. So the longer they take, the less tenancy income there is. And we know that that is a particular problem at the moment, and we know that that's due to workforce availability, cost of material rises, condition of properties coming back to us, a resistance from some tenants to allow us in to maintain their properties. So there's a combination of reasons, and we have got a specific action plan underway within the housing service to improve upon that. I don't think we're going to get that balance back to zero by the end of the year. There isn't enough time, and the pressures are quite substantial, but there are improvements being made, as Kerry's identified. It's an improving financial position, and we've got an action plan specific around improving the voids process.
Okay, thank you. I mean, we had the pre-meet, and this was one of the points you raised, and I thought this is well worth investigating. Is the whole voids question, because it is costing the council money, and as you say, there is a combination of factors here. One, the cost of getting the remedial works done in the first place. The one that slightly surprised me was the state of the properties being handed over to in a very poor state, or I don't know. And I did ask why that was, and I think it would be useful to ask the question again, why we're having to spend more money to remediate a house that's just had a reasonable tenant in it. And of course, you've then got the add-on problem that we can't demand entry. I think you say we could seek entry for something like a gas boiler, but nothing else. So if the house is deteriorating and the tenant doesn't want us in there's not much we can do about it. But it strikes me that there seems to be an emerging problem that people moving on are leaving their properties in a worse state than they took them on, and we're having to pick up the bill. Do you want to just expand on that a little bit, and then I'll...
Yeah, there's a couple of points to pick up on there. So what we are seeing is that some tenants are reluctant to let us in to undertake works, whether they be gas boiler inspections, EICR, so that's the fixed electrical inspection testing, or even routine maintenance. So some people at a certain point in their life decide that they do not want us coming in and fitting a new bathroom or a new kitchen. So that work gets stored up. And at the point that property becomes void, anything that is otherwise not a statutory requirement gets stored up and it has to be delivered in the voids process. We're also seeing tenants or potential tenants. So there are some properties that are harder to let than others. So whilst there is a queue of over 11,000 people on the housing register, we are having to make adjustments to the lettable standard in some instances where there are particularly difficult properties to let. That will cost us more money. We are having to put in better redecoration or conditions because we know that property will be hard to let. The cost wise, the cost of you will all know, the cost of everything has soared for materials. We're seeing the same in the employment market. So gaining and retaining tradespeople is really difficult, and we're having to pay more, and we're having to pay recruitment and retention allowances above and beyond job evaluated grades in order to compete in the employment market locally. You will know the impacts that Hinckley is having on some of that workforce as well. And obviously, as we move towards Agritas, that may well have a further knock-on effect. So there are a number of things. In terms of the injunctions, we can go to court and seek an injunction for access to undertake a statutory requirement, i.e. gas safety check or electrical check, because we are legally required to ensure those properties are in a safe condition. And we are overseen by the housing regulator if we fail to achieve that. So we can go to court and the courts will back us and they'll support that. What they won't do is support us saying we are going to seek a legal injunction to fit a new kitchen, not a statutory requirement. The hard bit is that has a knock-on effect to the Decent Home Standard. So the Decent Home Standard is largely a paper-based exercise that talks about component life cycles and condition. So we can breach the Decent Home Standard for not having the current correct level of loft insulation in a property, but we have no means of accessing the property to increase the loft insulation if the tenant says no. This isn't an en masse problem. I want to be clear, most tenants are very happy to have their properties improved, serviced and maintained correctly, but we are seeing an increasing number where we are having to get injunctions around those statutory requirements.
And that's costs as well.
It does, but we will seek to recover that court cost from the tenant.
Okay, thank you, Dawn.
Thanks, Chris. That sort of kind of answered the question I was going to make, but I'm just curious how many properties we are talking about here that we have the issue with the void access causing a lot of work further down the line. And obviously in the private sector, landlords, tend to have clauses of right of access, and this is obviously quite different. I think this has been discussed at a number of meetings that as a social landlord, you're answerable to different laws and regulations. I'm just curious, is there nothing we can do within our tenancy arrangements to put in access clauses, or is that overridden by anything statutory?
So there's a couple of things you said. You talked about voids access. Voids are those properties that are empty. There's no issue with accessing those. If this is about tenanted properties, there are clauses already written into the tenancy agreements about right of access. The only way to enforce that is to go to court. And are we going to go to court and receive a successful injunction to get that access? And just to be clear, the rules and regulations are exactly the same for private landlords as they are for social landlords. A private landlord knocks on the door of their tenanted property, and if the tenant turns them away, they have no legal right of access without an injunction. It's exactly the same.
I explained it wrong. I mean, how many properties are we looking at that are coming back in state of repair that is worse than has been in the past?
I don't have those figures to hand. We'd need to pick those up, and perhaps if we don't mind, could we hold that question for we're doing a housing item on a future agenda, and actually we could pick it up there as part of a more detailed response.
Yeah, I mean, bearing in mind that this is clearly having an impact on the budget, yes, it's something I think we do need to have a look at. And I think I've mentioned before, there was in one of the audit committee, there was an issue about our response to mould complaints, which I think we can pick up condition as well, if that's okay in that. Susanna, please.
Can you do you have a figure for what percentage of these tenanted properties are difficult to access because they don't want to let people come in to do maintenance work?
So we don't record that as a specific figure in our key performance indicators, but if you were to look at the performance reports that go to performance and resources scrutiny and then onwards to executive, there's a breakdown of all of the indicators there, and there's a breakdown between those within the in-house service managed by the in-house team and those managed by Homes and Sedgemoor, and that will give you a flavour as to where we're struggling. It's gas, it's electrical, some is decent homes, but that's not the sole reason for decent homes.
And I mean, this is probably an unfair question. Is there anything, any one cause of this, whether people are becoming more insular or whether they're doing things in their properties that they don't want anybody else to see? Have we got any sense of that?
No, I don't think there is a singular cause. We've seen a drop off of people giving us access post-COVID. I don't think that's a COVID thing. I think that's a lifestyle thing. I think people want to be left alone in the main, but I don't think there's a singular reason. We haven't suddenly identified lots of illegal use of our properties, for example.
No, lots of the use of electricity and bright lights after. Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions for Chris? Okay, well, thank you both, Chris's, for that. Sorry, yes, Dawn.
Can I just check, how's it going to work going forwards, Chris, if you're not actually working on the business, but you're coming to scrutiny to account for it?
So the HOA is ours. So it's managed from the strategy and the business case side is overseen by adults, and they set the business plan and the strategic direction. But when it comes to delivery, all of the HOA delivery sits within community, place and economy and sits under your constitutional remit. There was a deliberate reason for doing that. And that was to greater embed some of the council's strategic objectives into the people services. So you can't have a conversation about people without talking about their accommodation needs. So there was a deliberate decision to merge kind of the HRA strategy world and the general fund housing services in with adults. But when it comes to delivery of the landlord functions, they sit here and they are under my responsibility. And will continue to be.
Yes, of course, Marcus.
Well, we're on HI. So therefore, who would then decide? I suppose you do it on a needs basis on what's available and what sort of houses we build. Would that come from adults, or would that come from the HI in this committee, or through this one? Yeah, well, I mean, what size? Whether we're building 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, or in some cases, I've got residents who need 4 bedrooms because people have 3 kids and they meet someone who's got 3 kids, and before you know it, they've got 6 kids, as I can well account for. Well, no, the kids get partners, and it gets expensive at Christmas.
So in terms of our tenancies, we will manage our existing tenancies, and if people are overcrowded, then they can go onto the housing register once again, and they can look to do a house swap, or they can appeal to have a larger home. If you're talking about who sets the standard for new build or acquisitions, that will be done through the HRA business case. In the same way as it always ever has been, there will be a needs assessment undertaken that tries to predict the future needs for Somerset, both in terms of accommodation type. Is it a 1-bedroom flat because we're seeing lots of single individuals at homelessness, or is it a 4 or 5 bedroom property? So the needs assessment will determine that. It will go into the HRA business case and will determine what's affordable. So anytime the HRA buys a property, predominantly we are using borrowing combined with right to buy receipts. There is a bit of local authority housing fund at the moment that's available. It's a separate report that's going through the process, but predominantly that's being funded through the HRA business case. So that sets the objective. Once the objective for the council is set, the outcomes are handed over to the landlord, and we go away and do what the plan said in its simplest term. So if the objective says build 20 more houses that are 3-bedroom, that objective is handed to the landlord delivery teams, which we're going to talk about in a moment. And that's what they will do, as long as it's funded.
Okay. Right. Any other questions? No, I think a useful discussion there. I think overall, the thing that concerns me most is this business about voids and what we can do about it, and the impact it's having on the budget. And I mean, in the grand scheme of things, the figures aren't huge, but I think we all want to run a tight ship if we can. So thank you very much for that. And we'll move on to item 8, which is the housing development team. And Chris is going to tell us all about what the proposals are.
Yeah, thank you very much. We're joined by Peter Hatch, who's the Chief Executive of Homes in Sedgemoor. So if we've got any questions, we'll have both, obviously, the overarching view of the landlords. We'll have some in-house information available in the room, and there's also Peter from the Arm's Length Management Company. So the purpose of the report is to seek a decision from executive to combine the current two separate housing development teams into one. There are a number of reasons for wanting to do so. The first of which is that we lost our housing service director back in the summer, and we have not chosen to replace that role at this stage. He had a particular skill around housing development and seeking external funding, and there is a skills gap that Somerset Council within the in-house service currently has. But that skill exists within the Homes in Sedgemoor team because they also have their own individual housing development team. The council has one housing development programme, and what I'm seeking is one delivery team to deliver the one programme. I'm trying to not create duplication ahead of a wider options appraisal. So we could simply go out and say, we'll go to the market and we'll replace those skills that we've lost then, but you would be consciously creating duplication when we have already said that the housing has a view to create a single overarching housing landlord, and we have a separate project and timetable to look at all of that. So why would we not call upon the other skills that exist within Somerset Council's remit? There is often a misconception that the Arm's Length Management Company is a separate and somewhat mythical beast that's outside of our control or influence. So I will go about that one straight away. So Homes in Sedgemoor is an Arm's Length Management Company. It is a separate entity, but it is an entity that is wholly owned by Somerset Council. There is one shareholder and one shareholder only, and it is Somerset Council. So whilst they might be separate in their kind of legal construct, because of the historical nature of the councils doing different things, effectively they are all part of a wider team delivering for Somerset Council. And therefore, it makes perfect sense to look at merging those teams together. The proposal in the paper says, well, we would merge them and we would use Homes in Sedgemoor as the host authority or the host entity. The reason for that is because it's the in-house team that have the skills gap. So why would we have a conversation about moving the staff into the in-house team where the gap exists, rather than taking the in-house team and merging them into the Arm's Length Management Company? So that's why the proposal goes in that direction. Some other clarity points really here is just that at no point are we suggesting that the tenancies would be impacted by this proposal. At no point are we suggesting that the properties that are owned by Somerset Council would change ownership. So there is no change and impact to tenants because these are development team arrangements. These are the homes that we would be building or buying, and in the main, they are pre-tenancy. There might be a few where we're decanting some people and we are knocking down a home to build more in that same footprint, but predominantly this is about the growth arrangements for Somerset Council. Therefore, there's the proposal in front of you today, which we seek your comments on. If it goes through in 6th of January to executive positively, we would then start consultation with the impacted workforce. In this instance, by impacted, there's no redundancies being proposed. This is a consultation on 2P transfer. So the intention is to pick up the entirety of the in-house team and their roles and their budget and move them all across to sit within the Homes in Sedgemoor service. So no redundancies, no reduction of delivery, no change to the delivery plan. That's already been set. This is just about how the workforce resource is managed. No change to who owns the properties. They continue to be owned by Somerset Council, always have done and would be. No impact on tenants because that's the housing's options appraisal about maintenance and capital works, rather than this, which is very limited to development team. And no increased cost to the HRA. And in fact, there's the opportunity for financial benefits longer term by not replicating the same skills within both sets of the team. We've had a conversation in advance of this with the Tenant Strategic Board. So that's a specific in-house function. They asked lots of questions, but certainly raised no concerns. As part of this, we've reiterated to them and we've made the request, of Homes in Sedgemoor Board that a name change would be appropriate. So they've responded really positively to that. Their board has agreed not only to a name change, but they've now finalised that name. You'll note in the papers there's a gap And that's because there was a first preference of a name, but that name was owned by another entity. So they've tried to negotiate the acquisition of the name. That hasn't worked out, hasn't been successful, and they've therefore gone to their second preferred name. So that would be, drum roll please, Homes in Somerset. So I don't think anyone's going to take exception to the proposed name change, but we are in a strange scenario whereby, in order to progress this, I've asked Homes in Sedgemoor to change their name. They, through the board, have said, yes, we're prepared to change our name, and now they are asking me, on behalf of Somerset Council, whether they can change their name, because we own the company. So the long and the short of it is we are all in agreement, subject to executive sign-off, and I don't foresee any particular issues around name change. We've also identified that there's a need for greater level of oversight around the development function. So if we're going to take it and merge it into one area, we, from the in-house service, would lose that level of immediate oversight. So Homes in Sedgemoor responded positively by saying, well, we will set up a development subcommittee within that their board structure, specifically around the housing development programme. And they have also co-opted Federica Smith-Roberts onto the board, and that would entitle her to be a member of that development subcommittee as well. So we have 3 council voting members on the board, and we have Federica as Councillor Smith-Roberts as a co-opted member. So I think everything we've asked of Homes in Sedgemoor, they have positively met. As I say, I want to reiterate, there is no issue here in regards to tenancies or property ownership. It's a positive change. It assists with Somerset Council's delivery plan, and I would invite any questions.
Thank you, Chris. That seems reasonably straightforward. I saw the paper some time ago, and we had a brief discussion at the pre-meeting. So other than finally agreeing the name, I don't think there's much outstanding. Hazel, you have a question.
It's not well, I think this is motherhood and apple pie. What's not sensible about this is absolutely the way forward. I'm just intrigued to know what the first choice of name was, because I would have gone with Homes in Somerset in any case, but you may not be at liberty to tell us that. But I think it's really good initiative. Yeah, there's no question about it. Thank you.
Presumably the first name was copyrighted, so we need to be careful if we mention it in a public meeting, do we?
Well, I wouldn't go as far as say copyrighted, but I don't think it's a particular secret. It was Somerset Homes. I think I'm right in saying. Peter will correct me if I'm.
Yes, it was, Chris. Yeah, Somerset Homes.
Well, I suppose there aren't that many variations that you can come up with, are there, really? So
no, we looked at all of them.
Dawn.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely support this intention. I just want to check where you have, how are the financials going to work? Where you have earmarked reserves for sort of existing projects, they will continue. There won't be any money crossing over towards different, between projects, shall we say. It will, any works that are in the pipeline will remain in the pipeline within the earmarked monies.
Yeah, absolutely. So Somerset Council are the commissioners of all of these schemes, even if they're led and managed by Homes in Sedgemoor. So we write the purchase orders effectively. So no change to the programme of works, no change to the timetable, no change to the funding. It's just the people doing the work will sit in a single centralised team rather than in their 2 disparate teams as they currently do.
Okay. Yes, Marcus.
Thank you. Thank you. That was, yeah, I think I've got to grips with what's going on, but I think it's my question, I suppose, would be, and things like talk about things like the letting teams, and because we talk about all council stock will end up with what will be Homes in Somerset, which I think is a sensible move. Somerset Homes. No?
Homes in Somerset.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get I will own it, but they'll.
There is no change to the stock at all. All we are saying is that where the council has a development programme, it's currently delivered by 2 teams. The stock is always owned by Somerset Council. The stock is never owned by Homes in Somerset. It stays as it is. All we're doing is moving those people who are delivering the stock into one location, but it changes nothing in terms of ownership.
My question, I suppose, is things like things like the letting teams, etc. Because I mean, one of the things I know, one of the problems, well, I always was very surprised to find out that we had no political, in the past we had no political representation on Home Finder, which was very odd. I know that's probably been changed by now. But things like the letting teams and things like that, would that be done through Homes in Somerset as well, or would that be separate still? Well, and then what crossover you're then getting, etc.
Okay, so this is just about development teams. It's got nothing to do with the management of existing stock or lettings or tenancies or capital programs beyond those that deliver additionality. So all of the other processes stay the same. We are seeking to have a single landlord, and we have a landlord options appraisal being undertaken. We will start that in earnest in January next year. That has a specific project timetable. There are specific requirements for engagement with tenants, and we go into that without knowing what the outcome will be, but we anticipate one single landlord. So that's a much larger change over a much longer programme, and will require us to engage very specifically with tenants and consider their responses as to which model we were to recommend taking forward to council. This is simply the house building programme, effectively. It's 9 people, 7.51 FTE. It's a very modest part of the overall HRA funded service. So yeah, nothing to do with tenancies or Home Finder or anything else.
Okay, so in essence, it's nothing more than an internal reorganisation to bring the teams together and co-locate them. So I suppose so terms and conditions of some staff will need to be negotiated, but in terms of delivery, it should increase efficiency and would seems a sensible thing to do. Do I have any other questions on this topic? Okay, well, bearing in mind everybody seems very happy with this. The recommendation is that the Scrutiny Committee provides their support to the Executive on the following: to accept the proposed name change from Homes in Sedgemoor to Homes in Somerset, and we approve the principle of TUPE transfer of the Somerset Council Development Team to Homes in Sedgemoor, Homes in Somerset, with the association change the management agreement subject to formal HR consultation. Can I have Councillor Power?
No, sorry, Charles, just happy to propose that one for you.
Okay, if you have Councillor Power's proposing, can I have a second? A second to Dawn Johnson. All those in favour, please. Thank you very much. That is unanimous. Brilliant. Okay, well, move swiftly on.
Before we move on, Chair, can I just point out that I'm a member, although it is on my registered interest, I'm a member of Minor Town Council.
Yes, I think we already have that, but thank you, Marcus. Okay, so next is the devolution update, which Jonathan Stevens is going to take us through a presentation. Thank you. Okay, Jonathan, when you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning, members. Yeah, any update on devolution from operations services? Just a brief recap. I visited committee in June 2024, so June this year, to talk about the devolution of operations and give you an update on how we were going and the progress that we were making. So just to kind of clarify and reiterate, service devolution within operations. So that's primarily the services that you see on the screen. So grounds maintenance, play areas, public toilets, street cleansing, so sort of fairly low level street cleansing. I just wanted to kind of say as well, just for the avoidance of any confusion, so these are services. So I'm going to talk today about devolution of services and not so much asset. The two things are very closely related, so I will reference the transfer of assets, but we are talking about the devolution of services. So, you know, we devolve the service, the cutting of the grass, and our asset and legal colleagues devolve the actual park that we're cutting. So I will reference the progress that asset and legal are making, but it is very much a kind of twin track process. And the initial focus was on the following city, town and parishes, so Taunton, Bridgewater, Wellington, Minehead, and then the 5 main city, town and parishes in the Mendip area. So this was at the request of the councils, but also the Mendip area was driven as well by the fact that we currently have an external contract for the services that you saw in the first slide, and that expires on the 31st of May 2025. So we are working to insource that work, but obviously there's a neat opportunity to have discussions with the Mendip city, town and parishes around their desire for devolution. With regards to Taunton, Taunton has progressed well. So this is a piece of work that does predate the unitary authority, but there was an agreement to transfer the list of parks that you see on the screen to Taunton Town Council, and they would transfer over on the 1st of April 2025. In the meantime, Somerset Council has continued to maintain those open spaces and the public toilets via a service buyback arrangement, and that also expires on the 1st of April. So on the 1st of April, the services will transfer to Taunton Town Council. The asset transfers are complete. We have moved the public toilet servicing a little bit quicker, so we've managed to cease the external contract that we were using, and Taunton Town Council are now responsible for that. Taunton are making good progress in the background in readiness for taking on this work, and we're starting to discuss 2P implications with them now. Bridgewater has been our biggest service devolution to date. So Bridgewater Town Council have been maintaining the grounds and street cleansing services since the 1st of May 2024. Sort of touching on that twin track approach that I discussed earlier. So we've been able to devolve the services quicker. It's much quicker to devolve services. We've been able to do that under a maintenance agreement whilst the freehold transfers of the assets complete in the background. That's a much longer process. Once that legal process is complete, the maintenance agreement will fall away, and Bridgewater will own all of those spaces. As a council, we've supported where we've been required, but Bridgewater worked really hard to resource themselves up to take it on, and it's working well over there at the moment. The biggest challenge for them so far has been the carnival clean-up last month, but again, that was a success, and their teams were exclusively responsible for that. Wellington Town Council, we've been in discussions with Wellington for a fair while now, but they approved a budget for a service and asset devolution to take all that on from the 1st of April 2025. So that covers their main parks and open spaces in the town, grounds maintenance, play areas, public toilets, trees and bus shelters. As a council, we took a key decision in August 2024 to devolve the assets and services to Wellington. And we did also devolve the public toilets quicker as well on that one. So Wellington are now maintaining the public toilets. We've got an officer working group meeting monthly to deliver this at the moment. Absolutely no concerns with Wellington. It's been a real pleasure to work with them. And they, again, have resourced themselves up really well to take the work on from the 1st of April. Minehead, we have a package of service devolution agreed at officer level with Minehead, and now that has also been provisionally agreed by the Somerset Council Asset Management Group, which allows me to take that forward as a key decision, which I'm aiming to have completed by early January. Minehead have their own internal devolution board who have agreed the same package of devolution, and that is now working through their formal democratic process. That covers grounds maintenance, open spaces, play areas, trees, and some low-level street cleansing, like the emptying of dog and litter bins. It also includes a long-term lease on the maintenance of the Esplanade in Minehead. Minehead Town Council see that as integral to the town's tourist offering, understandably. So they would very much like to be able to maintain things like the play areas, the bins, the benches, the sweeping on that Esplanade. As I say, it's integral to the town's tourist offering. So the opportunity to have control over that is really important to them. Mendip, so the former Mendip District Council area, as I mentioned, the services have been delivered by an external contractor since 2012. That contract expires on the 31st of May next year. We are working to insource that, but we've had officer level conversations with the 5 main councils in Mendip to understand the appetite for devolution of services that are covered within the contract. There's a strong interest in open spaces, grounds maintenance and play areas. The conversations have furthest progressed with Wells and Frome. So Wells and Frome have both been through our Somerset Council Asset Management Group for sign-off, and key decisions will follow. And Wells and Frome are going through their own democratic processes as we speak. We also have conversations ongoing with Glastonbury, although they haven't progressed so far. We're still there's a few things we've got to work through in terms of the package with Glastonbury. We did remove the toilets early. So again, that was delivered by an external contractor, and we've removed that from the contract, and the 5 city, town and parishes are maintaining and servicing their own toilets now. Some other small areas in progress, Puriton, Netherstowey and Cannington, they are now managing their own open spaces and grounds under maintenance agreements, and we've reached an agreement with Cheddar as well, which will follow on. Probably just a reflection for our service is that the conversations with smaller parishes are taking place, but that they've been quite hard to take forward at any pace, just due to capacity really. So certainly with an asset management and legal capacity, delivering those transfers is very difficult, and increasingly as the other devolution processes really start to move forward, the capacity within operational services is limited too. I thought I would also cover the operational side of the Yeovil devolution. So this is mainly around the grounds maintenance of Yeovil Rec. So Yeovil Rec was devolved to Yeovil Town Council as part of Tranche 1 in August. Operational services maintained Yeovil Rec. So the staff and the equipment associated with the rec TUPI'd into Yeovil Town Council in August. We have been approached by Yeovil Town Council formally now with Tranche 2 requests, and they are mainly around open spaces and play areas, but we're working through that at the moment. And then finally as well, I thought I would also touch on markets. So the markets in the Mendip area, there are 7 markets in 5 of the main city, town and parishes in Mendip. They do fall under operational services. During the conversations, the devolution conversations that we've been having with those 5 areas, the markets have come forward as something that the towns, city and parishes there are very keen on. They do see them as integral to their respective visions and aspirations for each of their areas. So they see that having control over the market is very vital on that. So those conversations have grown, and we are taking this forward. To devolution of the markets listed on the screen there is being dealt with separately under a separate key decision, which we are working up at the moment. But as I say, the city, town and parishes of the former Mendip area, they see this as a very important request and critical to the wider devolution opportunities. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Very interesting. I've got 1 or 2 questions. A couple of councillors first. Hazel, you did wave, but you've had your question answered. Oh, right. Oh, it is a good sign. Tom Power, please. Then Dawn, then Susanna. Then Kathy.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to ask, this is my first committee meeting on this committee. But going through the PowerPoints and the slides that you just put in front of us, it'd be nice to get an update on the whole of, if possible, on the whole of South Somerset. I know you've got Yeovil on there, but Yeovil isn't just, the whole of South Somerset, because I get quite a lot of questions at my town and parish council meetings regarding the devolution, especially the rural parishes, and also Bruton and Wincanton Town Council. So if I could, I haven't got to have an update now, but if I could just have an email with regarding the update for the whole of South Somerset, that'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Chris.
I just want to make a general point. So the presentation today is around those that are actively underway. So these have been prioritised through council on the basis that they help us to close the budget gap What we have had is through the leader of the council, he's written to all of the towns and parishes and city councils and said, come forth if you wish to have a conversation around devolution, and many of those have done. So there is a pipeline, a very large spreadsheet pipeline of activity where individual city, town or parishes have come forward and said, we're interested in a conversation about this service or this space or this activity, but they have been prioritised based upon financial benefits and therefore closing the budget gap. So that's why these are chosen, but there is a much larger spreadsheet that sits outside of Jonathan's world because it's in Sarah Skirton's management of the overall devolution and LCN world. But this is the stuff that's actively happening right now in order to achieve a financial benefit to the MTFP. So it's on a list, is my point.
Okay, thank you very much. Dawn, please.
I just wanted to get a feel, Chris, on, how many years' work this will continue to be, really, this devolution process in terms of requirements of staff and, expense. Is there a timeline that this process is set to, or is it going to continue as long as it is required or requested by parishes? Is there a cut-off, basically? And sorry, there was another question which is rather Taunton-centric, I do apologise. But there's a lot of open spaces through Gowington and Combie which aren't parks as such. And I just was seeking clarity on who is going to be maintaining those areas, sort of small parks, and also the Orchard Grove development where open spaces and land is coming forward there.
There's a few questions in there. So no, there's no cut-off proposed. We're happy to have the conversations as long as city, town and parishes are. And to say there's a pipeline of activity at the moment, front-loaded with the really big deals. The big deals tend to be much more complicated. So the one with Yeovil, for example, there are leases in there that have to be novated. There are sections of land with multiple titles. There are covenants that have to be protected. There are asset transfers in the form of the Octagon, which is linked to another separate business case and funding. So the early ones have tended to be the most complicated because they are so large. We're open to having conversations for as long as the towns and parishes need us to. There have been some red lines, so what we won't do is necessarily keep going around the same conversation over and over again, but there is a broad pipeline of activity. I can't answer the question on Gowington because I can't remember if that's transferred or not, but John O might. And in terms of new developments, well, the council's only responsible for the land that's put up for adoption. So quite a common practice at the moment is for developments to set up their own management company and charge effectively a lease rent fee to occupants of properties that pays towards those communal areas. So if they're never put up for adoption, then this council will never have to manage those spaces. There's an argument for and against all of that, which we shan't get into today, but unless the developer puts it up for adoption, then it isn't maintainable at the public expense.
Thank you. Susanna.
Jonathan's going to come back.
Oh,
Yeah, sorry. So just to cover off, so anything that is not on that slide around Taunton, Somerset Council will continue to maintain next year. So, and then again, I don't want to open up the adoption can of worms either, but when something does come forward, we're having conversations with the towns and parishes to see if they would want to adopt that as part of devolution packages.
Okay, thank you. Susanna, please.
In the devolution update, December 24, mend it. Why does it say cleansing of toilets removed from contract early? And I'm assuming this means you've already offloaded the costs around that to the town councils rather than Somerset retaining that as an ongoing cost, but maybe you could clarify that.
Yes, certainly I can clarify that. So yes, we've removed, we had to get out of the contract that we were in, the external contract, but yeah, the city, town and parishes have taken on the cost of servicing those toilets.
Kathy, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. Just to say, as a Bridgewater councillor, I welcome this report and confirm that it has been really successful, the devolution of services. I mean, a massive amount of work behind the scenes, both for Somerset Council staff and Town Council staff, but we certainly wouldn't go back. But my question is, and you mentioned it in your report, about the asset transfer. Have you got any idea of timescales for that to happen, please?
No, sorry, that will be being dealt with by legal and asset management colleagues. So yeah, sorry, I'm just services, I'm afraid. I just do the do.
Okay, I mean, it occurs to me that we probably need to know a little bit of progress on that. I've got a question about assets as well, so I think if we can wrap it up in the next one, that would be.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly go back and get you an update from colleagues. Yeah, that's fine.
Wes and then Marcus. Wes, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. On the oval slide under devolution, you've got a line obviously at the approach of tranche 2, for example. What is the content of tranche 2? I mean, I know, but it's not indicated here, or is that something that's coming too late for these slides to be prepared maybe?
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, there's a list of specific open spaces that Yeovil Town Council have requested.
All I was asking is obviously not indicated here.
Yeah, so sorry, I haven't got the list to hand, but yeah, it's mainly the open spaces and the play areas within the town. What it's not is grass verges, highways verges, things like that. It's just the open spaces. It's also and most of the open spaces linked to the In Bloom programme as well, because that's obviously very important, understandably to Yeovil Town Council. So they're very keen that they can continue that In Bloom programme and have the control over the open spaces that are associated with that programme. But I can certainly provide the list because it's not a secret. I can provide the list to the committee afterwards.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Marcus, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's more of a point of clarification on the markets actually, because would I be right in saying that I'm going back that now that there's no districts, that Somerset Council's the market authority, if that's still such a thing, and therefore, if the people are interested, like mended markets, are they legally allowed to be the market authority? How does that all work, and is it possible? I mean, it's quite an exciting opportunity for some of those councils, I should think, but how does it? I just wonder how it all works legally.
Yeah, so we hold the rights and the charters to those markets. So the simple answer is we have to transfer those rights and rights and charters to those city, town, and parishes to give them the right to run the market, and that is what we'll do as part of the process.
So will they, in essence, become the market authority, or will we still be the market authority? Sort of.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, they will. Yeah, they'll become the market authority.
That's interesting. Dawn, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, sorry. It's just when you mentioned LCNs there, I was curious because as the chair of the Taunton LCN, it's very much been about Taunton taking on services and taking on devolutions, and none of the parishes that particularly that I'm aware of are involved. And I was just curious really to know if the LCNs have been involved in that, or if any works are happening due to the LCNs.
Yeah, so we haven't engaged with the LCNs directly through devolution and of services. We've been talking directly to each individual parish. So I've not gone to an LCN and given an overview. I know there's some highways. Again, it's not my remit, but I know there's some highways engagement with the LCNs around the highways warden scheme or highways ranger scheme, but not from my point of view, no.
Okay, thank you. I've got 1 or 2 questions myself. Just to sort of nail down this market thing, the charters for the market were not issued. Were they issued to the county council or the districts? And I'm just wondering, are we legally entitled to sort of devolve them or transfer them? I mean, I don't know much about this area of legislation, but it occurs to me that a charter given to a particular body or individual is totally distinct from other kind of legal mechanisms. And I just would be interested to know whether it's actually possible. That's my first question. And the second one is, second and third's about cost. Is you talked about, I know this isn't necessarily a report about asset transfer, but I would just be interested to know generally whether you're transferring assets for free, or whether we're having a nominal cost, or whether we're doing it for best value, or whether most of them are going via a lease so that we can at least have a bit of a backstop if something goes wrong. I'm also interested to know from a general taxpayer's point of view, and I don't know, I mean, this is a really unfair question for you, Jonathan, so please forgive me. But I would be really interested to know the relative costs of running each of the services before and after devolution, as to whether the cost being run by a parish or a town council is greater than the one we would have been able to do it at through our greater purchasing power or economies of scale or things like that. Are we, and I'd just like to know if we're doing any sort of work on that, because I think it is germane to the whole sort of local government financial crisis we're in, and it would be exceedingly unfortunate if charge payers ended up paying more for the same or perhaps a lesser service. And the final point is, I seem to remember a year or so ago, there were issues in the old Somerset Western Taunton area and possibly South Somerset, I can't be certain, about whether an external contract was due to run out, so this devolution could take place, but there was a complication over an option to renew. And I just wanted to know whether that was actually resolved in the end. So there's 4 things there. Sorry about that.
Shall I do the asset ones whilst John is scribbling some notes? So in terms of,
Jeff, you'll do a double act, that'd be great.
if the council has determined that an asset could transfer to a city, town or parish council, it is transferring at nil value and it's staying with, but it's transferring from one public body to another. There are some issues that we have to deal with in terms of the Secretary of State approvals for some large assets that might have a value on the books, because legally we're required to achieve best value. So there are some issues that we're working through with some of the larger assets, but the principle is they're transferring at nil value. The council doesn't get any financial consideration for it, but you are transferring it within public ownership. So that's what's been happening so far. There has to be an obvious and logical reason for it to transfer. So it has to be directly connected with something that that city, town or parish council wants to deliver. So if we're going to transfer the Octagon, it's because the Yeovil Town Council are going to deliver theatre services. What we wouldn't do is transfer at nil value something that it is a lettable asset for this council where we're receiving income. That would worsen the position for Somerset Council. So there needs to be a logic as to why the city, town or parish would want it. There's a blend of freehold and leasehold, mainly to do with its connectivity with other assets. So we've seen in the past the toilet block in the middle of a council-owned car park. We're not going to transfer that on a freehold basis because that would have a direct impact on the rest of the site. You can't transfer the Paul Street toilets, which are part of the multi-storey car park, for example, freehold, but there's a lease arrangement. So we're trying to find the most practical solution that gives certainty to both parties. So just touching on the kind of the before and after cost, and I'm sure John will have something to say, but in anticipation of these devolution deals, we've been giving out information in regards to the cost of running the service as it is now. For many city, towns and parishes, they're coming forward saying, well, we want to invest in the service that this council hasn't been able to do. So they are prepared to, in some instances, make improvements in toilet provision. They are going to therefore be spending more than we, Somerset Council, previously did, because they actively want to see improvements in that area. So before and after costings just need to be caveated with what's the beneficial reason for the increase in cost. If they've doubled in price of running toilets, I'm not saying they have, but if they were to, that would be because they've actively sought a higher standard of cleaning or maintenance, as we're seeing with some of the towns and parishes. I'll stop and let John answer.
So I just come back on the asset thing. Presumably, if they are transferred freehold, then there must be some sort of asset lock to stop the parish or town council selling them on to some third party.
Yeah, so anything that we transfer, there's a standard set of rules that are agreed through asset management group. So they need to be fully repairing and maintaining leases if they're in lease. They, if they're a freehold transfer, they're transferred with all of the existing covenants and overages and rights of preemption. All of that is packaged in as part of the asset management group decision. So when a decision is made for asset transfer for devolution, it goes through the asset management group in the first instance.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I think, yeah, just a couple of points to add to that as well. So any open space, for example, that we transfer that hasn't got a restrictive covenant on it, there will be a restrictive covenant placed on it as part of the transfer. And it's the same with the public toilets. They have to stay as public toilets. So just to, yeah, cover that piece off as well. And Chris is right in terms of strategic asset management group. We have to take, we have to show that asset have done a strategic assessment on a piece of land that we want to transfer over to ensure that, you know, we're not losing out, I suppose, for want of a better phrase. So going back to markets, yes, in short, it is possible to transfer the market. So we transferred the market rights as part of the Bridgewater devolution. Some of these documents are incredibly old. You know, they're kind of 12th century documents that you're dealing with. So, you know, again, not wishing to open cans of worms, but there's always been historical arguments about who should actually have those historic rights and charters as well. So there is an argument that we're giving it back to who it should have had it in the first place. But again, not going to open that can of worms. Yeah, and also just touching on Chris's point about cost as well. You know, what we are seeing, as Chris quite rightly points out, we are seeing town councils wanting to do better things and wanting to maintain things better than we might. So that examples of things like that are, you know, more regular emptying of dog and litter bins. You know, they're getting around quicker and repairing benches. And all you need to do really, I think, is to spend some time on social media looking at Wellington Town Council and Taunton Town Council are really good examples of that, where they've employing wardens who are going out and doing really good work in the community. And then the final question was around, so I think you're talking about the ID Verdi street cleansing contract in Somerset West and Taunton. So there was a clause on that for an acceptable performance clause, which was triggered. So yeah, that's where the final 3 years. So we've got another 3 years on that contract in that area, which was triggered by an acceptable performance clause. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So will get in the way to an extent. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Right. Are there any other questions? It's very interesting discussion, covering a lot of ground. Oh, Susanna.
So, sorry, are you saying that we are stuck? I'm going to call it stuck. ID Verde for another 3 years.
Only in the Somerset West and Taunton area, not the Mendip area.
Okay, perfect. Well, perfect.
Yeah, this came up when we were discussing devolution 18 months ago or something like that. And Chris reported that there was a discussion over whether they could extend, and seems like they could. So anyway, that's good. Right. Are there any other questions for Jonathan? All right. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Chris, over to you. Oh, Susanna?
Can I just ask one more question? If there's a bit of a stalemate situation over an asset when there's a huge long lease which is already held by the town council, but I'm assuming Somerset's an intrinsic value in the asset, how will that kind of ever get resolved?
But it will go to the asset management group and they will reach a decision. That's a member decision with delegated powers from executive. So there are 3 executive lead members that sit on asset management group and ultimately be their decision.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Chris, and thanks, Jonathan. That was really useful. Right, the last item on the agenda is Chris is going to give us a quick whistle through where we are with transformation in relation to the communities function.
Yeah, thank you. So it's pitched as transformation, but really this is to do with the workforce reorganisation work. So following on from the secondary version of LES 2 and 3. So we now know that everyone, there are people in each of the roles in LES 2 and 3, and there are people that are displaced and currently working their notice. So those who were successfully appointed into those roles started in that new job on the 1st of November. That includes me, which is why my name change is now Community, Place and Economy. So that started in November, and there are a number of us in that situation. There are some people displaced, as I've said, working their notice. Some have already left the organisation, as I'm sure you'll be aware. Others will be leaving at the end of March. So we're in that notice period. We are also in the period of consultation for the wider workforce reorganisation. So that is every other role of this council. You'll be aware that in getting to that point, we went through a process of voluntary redundancy. So that scheme was opened and closed, and there was in the region of 200 successful, for want of a better phrase, applicants to the voluntary redundancy process. So that enabled us to deliver some decisions quite quickly, and many of those people have already left, and therefore the financial benefit to that process will be felt in year. So that helps us control budgets in year. We then went out and started a 45-day consultation on the rest of the organisational structure. So this relates to the design authority, the design panels and blueprints and names you've probably heard of during this process. And effectively, the organisation has been redesigned in most instances from top to bottom. And therefore, we have sought to make reductions whilst protecting statutory service delivery. There's always a debate about what is or what is not statutory, and it's not always a helpful debate. And the example I will always use, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, is street cleaning. Street cleaning is a statutory function, but the level at which is provided is not set out within the statute. So we must statutorily clean the streets. However, we have complete autonomy as to how we do that and to what standard. So that's one reason why the statutory and discretionary debate is often a distraction rather than an assistance. We started the consultation process for 45 days, and in doing so, we have published the proposed structures for unions and, of course, for employees. So we are consulting with unions and employees. We're not publicly consulting because it's effectively an operational matter as to how the council organises its current resourcing. So that consultation was due to finish on the 7th. Unions have requested an extension, which we've agreed to, and that will now finish on the 14th of December. So at that point, we will have closed down the opportunity for individuals to give us their consultation responses, to raise their concerns, fears, clarifications, and we have received a considerable response. And whilst I haven't got the numbers in front of me, it was over 1,000 responses had been received 2 weeks ago when I was told about the number. So significant volumes, and they can range from everything from I can't see my post in the new structure, but no one's spoken to me. And in those instances, we've acted really quickly to be able to say, yes, your post is here. Or, no, we think you've been missed and through some other format. So some of those have been managed as we go through. We've also held what was referred to a midpoint review. So each of the executive directors had a day where their relevant service directors came in and said, right, I've received all of these comments. Off the back of these comments, I'd like to make some changes. So we have made some particular changes to the proposals where we believe that they're improvements or clarifications. So as an example, we ran the report on vacancies across the council probably over 2 months ago now. We know that people have been leaving the organisation through their normal turnover, but we might have put someone impacted in a role where actually now we have a vacancy. So therefore we could remove the vacancy rather than removing the individual. So there have been some of those where actually the ongoing vacancy rate has been helpful in meeting our duty to minimise statutory redundancy, compulsory redundancies. So we've been able to swap in some instances and protect those, which is our legal duty to do so. So we held those as part of the midpoint review. We also had some teams come together and say, okay, if we've got that as a cost envelope, rather than doing the thing you've proposed, we think the team would be better structured in a slightly different way. So I'll use property services as an example. Their management team came together and submitted one response that said, don't do that, do this instead. It will cost you the same, but it will actually be better for the workforce and better to deliver the service. We've reviewed that at the midpoint and said, you know what, that's a good idea. We're going to do that. Thank you very much. And we've updated the consultation documentation set as a result. So there's been a lot of positives that came out of the midpoint review. There were also some clarifications around job descriptions or job titles or line managements. And we've had a couple of instances where the finance documentation set said one thing and the drawn structure said another, and we've been able to clarify and put right. There have been some genuine errors in drawing, not necessarily errors in the structure, but errors in the drawings. So we've been able to put those right. The intention was to hold then an end of consultation review process, as you would expect, but we've then extended the consultation timeline. So rather than ditch those end of consultation meetings, I did mine yesterday, so all day again with all of the service directors and heads of service. I know Alan's doing his today and others are doing the similar thing this week. So we decided to keep them because of volume. So we've then gone through another effectively midpoint review style and made further clarifications or alterations as we go. probably much smaller. The main ones came through the midpoint review, but we've been able to deal with those, as well as set out our response to each consultation receipt. So employee raises a consultation response, it goes into a central database, is assigned to an individual service director or head of service for response. We then respond. Sometimes it's thank you, we know your concerns, or we'll mitigate those concerns through this means. Sometimes it's we are going to actively change the structure off the back of your comment. What we're not doing is say everyone who says, please put my job back in. Clearly, that is not a viable option. But if there is a genuine cause for concern, we are reviewing it at those meetings. So we did that yesterday, made some further alterations and clarifications, and we will do that again once consultation closes. We've been encouraging people, obviously, to submit their responses as soon as possible, because that gives us more time to consider them. We will, however, consider every response that's received, regardless of when. It's just helped us using this midpoint review process, because answering one concern has often fed through to a number of other people with similar worries about the same thing. So getting it early has been really positive. And I believe the workforce have seen it in that way as well, because we said it was meaningful consultation, and this is our evidence that it absolutely is. So we're in the process now. Final week of consultation closes on the 14th. We will then do a final wash up. That will then go across through to ELT. There'll be some changes that they need to consider, and we'll need to establish whether that has a positive or negative impact on the budget. And we know that there is a budget target in the MTFP strategy for workforce reduction. And ultimately, it will be in consultation with the executive, but it will be the chief executive's decision to then say, right, that's the structure. So we've reached the end of consultation and I'm now publishing the structure for this organisation. And when we will move to recruits to that structure. And of course, that does mean some people are impacted by that as a proposal. Some people are sat within a ring fence. So if you are impacted, it's because there is a significant change to your role. It might be as blunt as we're proposing to delete it, or it might be that we've said, well, we've currently got 10 of those people doing that thing, and in future, we're only going to have 5. So you're impacted by that change. Once we get to the end of the consultation, it's no longer a proposal, it is the structure. And at that point, people become at risk of redundancy if they're in that cohort. You then go through the recruitment process. And for those who are displaced by that process, they would then be given their notice. So there is still a lead in to this happening. There is a chance that some of the roles that are displaced and ultimately made redundant may run on beyond April, because for some roles they have a 3-month notice period, and we can't place them into that notice period until we've exhausted all reasonable routes of them being appointed into the structure, either because they're in a ring fence or because there might be a suitable alternative role. That is a recognised statement. That's not me saying it's suitable. There is a recognised process to determine if someone is eligible for a suitable alternative role. So that can take a bit of time, and we know that the budget from the 1st of April will see the savings reduction in it from day one. So there are conversations underway at the moment for those people that might tip over into the 1st of April, into the new, or 6th of April, new financial year. Are we going to pay them in lieu of notice, or are we going to allow them to continue to work on their notice? And we'll have to look at the volume of people that's impacted by that. And for some services, it might be case by case, because the recruitment process is also trying to stabilise the service at the same time as manage the losses. So there will be some people in new roles as well as some people exiting. So sorry, that's me talking at you a lot today, and that specifically, but that is where we are in the procedure. The savings are substantial, the reductions are certainly not insignificant, and we are doing our best to manage service impacts in those decisions that we're making.
Okay, Chris, thank you very much. I've got Dawn who's got a question. So Dawn, and anybody else?
So far then, with the tweaks that happened at the mid-stage process, has that had an impact on the budget? I.e. has maybe changing things from what you thought was going to happen to what you've reconsidered, has that impacted the budget either positively or negatively, the tweaks you've made so far?
At the midpoint review, no. So the expectation was that if a service director wants to come back and said, I've got a problem, I've cut too deeply here and I need to add a role back, that they balanced that with a saving from elsewhere within their structure. And if they couldn't within their immediate structure, within my executive director area. So if we added a post back here at a cost, we need to take a post out somewhere else with our immediate control to balance it. So there has been some of that going on. In fact, there's been quite a bit of that, and that's where the vacancy numbers have been really helpful because they've been enabled us to make those decisions without further impacting on people. There were some additional people impacted as part of the midpoint review. So in one service area in particular, there was a team identified that would be impacted. We've changed the proposal slightly, and it changes the individuals who are impacted. And we've had to manage that with those individuals because they weren't impacted at the beginning, and come the midpoint review, they were. So we've had to try and manage that as we go. I think there are some things emerging that, and I can only speak for kind of community space and economy here, so we've been balancing it. There are some things that have come forward in the meeting yesterday where we believe we've made cuts that are greater than the organisation can sustain. And we've put in some separate pressure bids to say, actually, I don't think we can make these reductions. So planning is often referred to, I appreciate it's not this committee, but it is now within the wider remit. So we believe that the starting position for planning was wrong. What we inherited from previous authorities wasn't sufficient. I think a lot of people would probably agree with that and say, well, how come it's taken you a year to figure that out? So the answer to the question is that we've engaged an external consultant to do a review of the work volumes, and we now have evidence that the team size cannot manage the volume of work. So we've got a pressure bid submitted with an overarching business plan that says, if we want a stable planning service, this is what we need. So there will be some additional costs that come out through this process from where we were at launch.
Okay, I mean, that's very interesting. I mean, there are several members of planning committees around the room here who I think would be quite relieved to hear that there has been some sort of movement. Yeah. Perhaps you could have saved a bit of money on consultant. No, never mind. Yeah. I think the one thing you said that really troubled me was that when at the outset, somebody who saw that their role was okay suddenly discovered at midterm that they were suddenly under threat. Now, I mean, all I can ask and hope is that that was absolutely minimised and you made as best use as you can of the vacancies available to because that would be pretty gutting really to anybody, I'm afraid. Marcus.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, it's that point there was greater than the organisation could sustain. And yeah, I mean, sorry, Simon, but it's not all about planning. There's lots of other services out. There's lots of other services out there that may be, and of course we won't really know how they'll be impacted, and that's not pretty for this committee. So as a quick, I mean, my concern would be that those, and how you get over those that shout louder, seem to get listened, sometimes get listened to, and hopefully that's not the case. My question though is, on the consultations, you had 1,000 back. Am I right in saying councillors can consult? And if so, how do we do it? Because obviously I will leave it to the 14th before I get round to it, but I just wondered.
We had a briefing from Alan last week and he said that the 1,000 responses, I think, was based on the 22nd of November. So there would have been a lot more come in since then. And yes, councillors, I was going to say this, are really encouraged to put into it. And I think if you go onto the SharePoint site, and yes, I have been through there and I've lived to tell the tale. I have to say, getting into some of this information is really tricky. But I'm sure Chris and the other directors, if you have a specific concern, and I don't want to load any extra work onto the directors, would be prepared to give you a sort of thumbnail sketch of what's the area you're concerned about. So I, like Simon, have always been interested in planning and things like that. But as you say, there are lots of other areas. Rights of way was mentioned earlier on. And highways, of course, highways is taking a bit of a hit as well. So if you want to know what the impacts are, you can ask, you could delve into the SharePoint, you can also ask your service director, but you do need to get your responses in by the 14th, which is Saturday. So homework for everybody. Edit Marcus. Yeah, okay. I think any other questions?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's very welcome news on the planning review. I'll just add my voice to that. But it's just so massively unsettling for staff, isn't it? And I'm just seeking reassurance that there is support for staff affected in next steps, whatever that might be.
Yeah, so if I may, I'm just going to pick up a couple of points. So there was a phrase used about those who shout loudest. So this isn't about those who shout loudest. This is about those who are able to credibly make a case that the council will fail to meet its statutory obligations if you proceed to do this. And therefore we are reviewing those and seeking evidence of it. That's why we got an external, because there is lots of noise about planning. What we needed was evidence that supported, if we're going to make a change, we need evidence. The decision to implement that has not been made. I want to be absolutely clear. There is a proposal, it's submitted as a pressure bid and will go forward into the council. I can't say what council will do with it, but we are pushing that on the basis of it's a credible, necessary change from the position of officers to meet our statutory obligations, but it's not yet decided upon. Oh, sorry, support. So we're holding a range of events. So those people who have been impacted have been invited to meetings to say you're impacted. You're not at risk of redundancy in formal language because this is a proposal at this stage and you're invited to submit your consultation responses and we will respond to those consultation responses and we're doing that as we go. We've also held a number of, and I've forgotten what they were called, but kind of workshop style events, marketplace type events where we've hosted in each of the key office locations a range of support activity, whether that be our own HR teams and organisational development through to various colleges having stands about what might the future look like. The pension service have been present, citizens advice. So we brought in all of the kind of interested partners that we could use to support employees all the way through to our libraries going, did you realise that we've got all of this resource material available to you if you're new into the jobs market or you've not done an interview for a while? Here's a whole load of resource material that's available to you. So there's lots of activity happening around that, and then as we progress through the process there is also an additional and external support package that's been arranged through a company called Renovo. They will provide coaching support for individuals to help them with applications or setting up a business or a whole range of alternative kind of employment models that they might not previously have thought through and just want to have external support that isn't the council, because for some people it is the council that is obviously making these decisions and they want something more independent. So all of that process runs on and can continue to support them. I think it's for up to 3 months. So even if people have left the organisation, there can be some ongoing support for them.
Okay, I've got Dawn for the committee and then I've got Rosemary Woods online. Dawn?
Yeah, just slightly concerned where you were talking there about needing to be evidence-based. As councillors, we can't provide evidence as such. So as an example, I haven't had an assistant highways officer for a long, long time now, which causes me issues because I don't have anyone I can go to for anything regarding highways, but I can't evidence the impact that that will have had on me doing my work or getting responses for my community.
Yeah, so we welcome responses of any type. I think the difficulty we've had with some is that they would have a very high cost to deliver. So if we're going to make a change to planning, it is going to have a cost to it. So not only are we saying with planning, we can't deliver the blueprint savings that we thought we could, what we're actually saying is that I don't think the start point was right. So if we were to take that, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of pounds of additional cost to the council. So if we're going to do that, we need to evidence the fact that it will enable us to meet our statutory obligations. If you have a view about how the service runs, then we welcome it. But where there are large scale costs associated with additions into the structure, we need more than just someone saying, I'm a bit concerned about how the service will work if there's 2 people instead of the current 4. There is a real difference for us between opinion and concern versus evidenced fact of failure.
I think that's where it's going to get very difficult for councillors, because we won't have that evidence trail. We just have the experience of difficulties in delivering our job.
Yeah.
And we'll triangulate all of that evidence. So if you're saying that you've got a particular concern about highways, and the highways team are saying we can't meet these statutory obligations, you know, we're going to theme a lot of these activities so that we can work through, if we're going to make a change, how many of the concerns will that change fix?
Right, thank you. Rosemary online, welcome.
Yeah, I was pleased to say that there's going to be changes about the planning, what's happening with planning, because we found certainly in West, we haven't had planning. We haven't had some plans come forward because there hasn't been the staff to take them forward. But the other place where we're hearing there's going to be changes is highways. Now, we've had a very good service from highways since we've been able to talk to highways at the LCNs. Now, I can see that that will disappear, but it means that where we could actually know when highways are going to do something, we won't. Can you give us some reassurance that that won't deteriorate from what has been improved lately?
So I don't think I'm in a position to give reassurance, because until council makes a decision on the proposals, I don't know exactly which structure we'll go with. There has, however, there is an alternative to some of the area highways teams that is being put forward as part of the midpoint review. It's been costed and it will go to ELT for consideration and onwards. But I can't guarantee what the outcome of that will be. But I believe that it would resolve a number of the issues that we're hearing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I've got one slight question. In your presentation or your talk, you mentioned that clearly there's an organisational churn of staff leaving. You implied that it was within normal rates. Is that what you meant? Because I was under the distinct impression that there were people tending to jump ahead of this process, and therefore I'm quite interested to know whether the average rate of job or post turnover is the same this year as it is in normal years. Do you know that information?
So I don't have that organisation wide. No, what we're seeing, so for customer services as an example, they have a normal rate of churn that you can pretty much predict because of the nature of that role and its difficulties. So that is within normal range. I think my reference to normal was not voluntary redundancy, not compulsory redundancy. There is a natural churn that the organisation has. We are hearing that that churn is slightly higher because of concerns. People are going and finding alternative opportunities rather than staying. That's what we're hearing anecdotally, but I don't have that level of evidence for you, I'm afraid.
Well, I suppose we're not going to find that out. It all comes out in the wash at the end. Okay, right, ladies and gentlemen, are there any other questions for Chris on the transformation? As I say, I would urge you to have a look at it if you haven't done so already and put some comments in before Saturday. It is important, and we have just as much right to have a say in this as everybody else, and indeed we have a role to play in this. I don't know. I mean, I think most of the big groups, I think, have probably had a briefing on this, but I'm not sure all the smaller ones have. But if you have any specific queries, I'm sure that service director will be prepared to give you a quick run through of what's what in their area, and you can make comments accordingly. But I think, as Chris said, it probably need to back it up with a little bit more than "I don't like this." It has to be because it will diminish or something, whatever. Anyway, I have no wish to teach you how to suck your eggs. And it's just after 12 o'clock, so we're running way ahead of schedule. But it is chilly, and so I'm going to say let's close the meeting and thank everybody for their time and their trouble for coming today, and look forward to seeing you on the 22nd of January, if not before. Well, we'll all see you next. Happy Christmas. Yes, for those I don't see. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Bye.
Happy Christmas all.